over the weekend, some violence breaking out in the Atlanta area. A riot it's interesting. When a riot starts off as a protest, the Democrats involved around this in the media will say it is a peaceful protest that turned into something else. Some protests get the benefit of the doubt. Others obviously are the biggest threat to our democracy since, Pearl Harbor or whatever. But I want to tell you about this riot that occurred over the weekend. So there's something in the Atlanta area that activists it's the Atlanta Police Department training facility that's being built, which these leftists are calling Cop City. So there was a group, and it was, Clay, over the weekend, I was trying to dive into all this, a group that called themselves the Forest Defenders, who were showing up and engaging in destructive and criminal acts. They were sabotaging things, and because they didn't want Cop City, as they call it, to be built, because they thought that this is just the enshrining of the police state or something. It's fascinating, isn't it? The activists say they want just better training for police and de-escalation, and you're going to build this large multidisciplinary law enforcement training facility to do that kind of stuff. De-escalation, non-lethal, whatever. And then the leftists are saying, oh, but it's going to take too many trees and the environmental impact and the enshrining of police, because they're lunatics. But the Democrats in the media all have a lot of sympathy for this and for this movement. But this was particularly egregious. There was a lethal shooting here, law enforcement involved shooting of a protester who opened fire on a Georgia State Patrol trooper. So one of these forest defender lunatics pulls a gun and starts shooting at Georgia State Police, right? Georgia State Police returns fire and kills him. And then other forest defenders, these are all Biden voters, by the way, leftists, decide that they're going to burn down they burned a police vehicle, and they're destroying things and engaging in a riot. And somehow we're supposed to think that this is peaceful protest that just got a little out of hand. The whole thing is lunatic stuff.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen the videos, definitely worth watching the videos. Buck, they arrested 6 Antifa, it appears, activists, right? In some way, these groups are connected. All 6 were from outside of Atlanta. I believe 5 were from out of state. One was from Decatur, Georgia, which is a suburb, basically, of Atlanta. The other 5, I believe, were from out of state. All white people. So I just want to point this out. You have out-of-state rioters that are showing up in Atlanta and are burning, looting, pillaging, engaging in violent behavior. And on CNN, which has a substantial footprint in Atlanta, they have a spokesperson go on air and basically say, oh, yeah, I mean, it's a cliche because we've had to go through this so many times. But the amount of time that they say this is, essentially mostly peaceful protest,
we have a journalist on CNN here saying, let's not remember, they marched because they were outraged that a leftist pulled a gun and started firing at cops, and they fired back and killed him. So they're outraged that happened. And then they're marching in Atlanta, and they decide that a group of them, as you said, 6 have been arrested, basically Antifa maniacs. They're domestic terrorists, everybody. That's actually what they are. Let's just use the proper terminology, which you won't hear that on MSNBC or CNN. They start smashing things, destroying property, and lighting a police car on fire. And this is what they're saying over at CNN as this is all happening. Play 7.
I think that there's a real blurring of the lines in the use of the word violence. Is property destruction violence? To some people, it certainly is. But this idea that breaking windows or other acts of property destruction are the same as actual violence against humans it's kind of a dangerous and slippery concept. You know, you keep using these words, violent, and it gives the impression. I mean, the only violence or the only acts of violence against people that I saw were actually police tackling protesters.
Okay, so this is fascinating. This is on CNN's air. I want everyone to hear that. The only violence. Now, he leaves out the violence of the maniac shooting at and trying to murder police officers, which then spurred this whole protest on the streets. But the whole point of the property destruction is, yes, economic pain, but it's also, Clay, meant to intimidate. You could argue by this guy's same logic, hey, I just went into a bank and held a gun up and said, fill my bag full of money. I didn't hurt anybody. Right? The impression or the belief that violence is imminent is also something that has to be policed. When you're when you're throwing things and lighting cars on fire, I think people are right to think that's unsafe. You are threatening my physical safety as well as destroying property.
When a police car is burning, that is the essence of violence. So the argument of, oh, it's just property. No. When you burn a police cruiser, that is violent behavior. And to the credit of it's a newly elected mayor of Atlanta. He's been in this office a relatively short period of time. Andre Dickens. He replaced Keisha Lance Bottoms, who I believe is in the Biden administration now. And she was fired up about all the crime-related issues, but just decided not to run. Really, the mayor race in Atlanta turned on who could stamp down on violent crime the most. And I think this is interesting that the mayor of Atlanta pointed out that these violent protesters were from outside of Atlanta and came to the city of Atlanta. Again, Atlanta is a majority black city. We have 6 white Antifa protesters arrested committing acts of violence. The mayor wasn't standing for it. Listen.
They had a protest last night, and it was peaceful. But there were some individuals within that crowd that meant violence. They had explosives. They burned down a police car. They broke windows at businesses. And so our police department, along with our state and federal partners, took swift action within 2 blocks and brought that situation under control. And the violence stopped, and those 6 individuals were arrested. And it should be noted that these individuals were not Atlanta or Georgia residents. Most of them traveled into our city to wreak havoc.
Now, he's saying some of the right things here, and that's why you're pointing that out.
Which is a change, right? From a big city mayor for a change, finally saying we got to stamp this out.
All of the leftists out there, they're running out of excuses and explanations for why whenever people do what the anti-police left wants, everyone is less safe, there's more violence and destruction, and there's urban decay, and the whole thing turns into a mess. They're running out of ways to explain to people, enforcing the law less and deciding that you're going to use social justice instead of criminal justice for police departments. This isn't going to work anymore. And more places are seeing this. Actually, you bring this up. New Orleans, which has the highest per capita murder rate of any major city, which is so, I know you agree with me. I love New Orleans. I think it's one of the coolest, best towns in the whole country. It's a top 10 city for me in America. I love it. Far too violent right now, obviously. Far too much violence going on in that city. Mayor LaToya Cantrell spoke about it and said some stuff that is on the right track. Listen to this, play 10.
New Orleans has the highest per capita murder rate of any major city. Why?
Why is because, one, dealing with COVID-19, violence, everyone has guns. The ability or the lack of the ability to resolve a conflict without reaching and pulling a gun. Also, as it relates to accountability, low-lining offenses, when they don't get bail or they're not restrained, then we're just seeing how these crimes escalate. Mm-hmm. People need to be held accountable across the board.
Clay, can I just say, so obviously the first thing she said about COVID is preposterous, but that's been a Democrat talking point for a long time now to try to cover up the decay of these Democrat-controlled cities. I think, though, this is part of what you're going to see, this slow shift. Oh, it's still about, COVID or police training or whatever, but she uses this word accountability. What that really means is locking up criminals and enforcing the law. The inescapable truth that even Democrats are now having to face is You have to lock up criminals. You have to enforce the law, or else not only does this stay, it gets worse. And that's where we are.
And they're also slowly having to come to the grips with the fact that this is all George Floyd protest related. The data does not reflect that this occurred because of COVID. It's because Democrats made a conscious decision in the wake of one viral video out of Minneapolis to brand all police as evil, and also to essentially tell their base, which is a large portion of many cities, you don't have to respect or comply with police anymore. And in fact, if you get arrested, you're the victim of a structural racist society. And as a result, crime skyrocketed. And now you're seeing that people don't like when crime skyrockets in the cities. I mean, you talk about New Orleans, Buck. For many people who've been down there, it has gotten to the point now where if you stray a little bit outside of the main streets in the French Quarter, you go very far off Bourbon Street at all, it's not safe. And the number one lifeblood for New Orleans and all those businesses is what? Tourism. And if people don't feel comfortable coming on the road and taking a vacation in New Orleans because of the, as you pointed out, rightfully, the highest rate of murder of any decent-sized city in America, then everything starts to fall apart. And everything is falling apart in many of these cities, such that mayors are recognizing.